Great to
we
see
were,
you.
it's good to see you. This is really good of you to join us. Thank you. We're going to begin, we'll begin just with an opening prayer, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of information, a little bit of housekeeping about how this is going to work. I'm going to switch to Matthew, who's going to be our segue. And then we're going to turn much of it over to Sam, both for conversation, and I think there's lots of questions that people might have for you, or lots of comments that have arisen out of the book. So we'll begin first with a prayer. Still our minds and our hearts. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this, for our time together over the summer. We have been challenged, inspired, and enriched by the experiences of all who've gathered in this space. We give thanks for all of our participants, their gracious listening and generous contributions, and for our leaders, and for all who've helped produce this, and especially today for Sam Wells, for guiding us and in our story together. In your name, amen. Okay, so I've got some housekeeping. We're going to make this real quick. So as what we've been doing all along is we've been breaking into groups, as you all know, and we've been discussing each chapter at a smaller level. We're going to stay in community of today, and we're going to discuss a little bit the appendix. Matthew's going to talk about that in a second. And then there'll be an opportunity for conversation and questions, and we'll finish probably just about 5 minutes to the hour, and Jeffrey will have some information about some future events and what's going on, a little bit about a hard edge, I think, as well. So I am, without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Matthew at this point.
Great. Thanks, Mary Kate. And hi there again, Sam. I hope you're enjoying the Robertson Davies Rebel Angels novel from the spring. So, and I'm coming to you again from the diocese of your birth in southwestern Ontario, Huron. So yeah, let's spend a few minutes first with the appendix, which I found very intriguing. Like, I was a bit familiar with natural church development. I have some experience with that, and the pandemic was certainly an experience of the quantitative measures kind of thrown out the window during the lockdown. So maybe a bit more of a turning towards qualitative or storytelling. And you've divided up the measuring tools into with God, with oneself, with God together, with our close neighbors as I look out the window, with our distant neighbors, and then with creation, again turning towards the window. Do you want to maybe, I don't know, can you speak generally about the appendix, which is just so fulsome, so different from a lot of the measuring tools like average Sunday attendance, though not necessarily opposed to that. But I'm curious, where have you gotten pushback?
I just realized I was with somebody and took the book next door earlier today. I'm just going to go and get it and bring it back. I'll be 15 seconds.
I can hold it up. And then after this time, focusing on the appendix, maybe if you can start to formulate any questions just that have arisen from the whole book. So you might want to start to jot those down.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of, oh, sorry, Sam. We were just saying,
you carry on.
We were just doing the group here to Matthew suggested to think about questions about the appendix, but beyond, and we had a lot of very strong discussions last week on the final chapter in particular, but all the way through. So
well, I guess most of what I would want to say is in those little boxes at the bottom, which are a kind of commentary on the learnings bit. But I suppose it goes back to the beginning of the book, where I basically say we're using a model that's no longer fit for purpose, to use a contemporary jargon. We still set church up as if we thought 75 minutes on a Sunday was our medicine to ensure we go upstairs when we die rather than downstairs. And even though probably, I'm guessing, nobody on this call actually believes that, that's still the way we structure our church life. And so I create these two phrases, one of which obviously is the title of the book, Future Bigger Than the Past, FBP, as I call it these days. And the second one is the title of a subsequent book, Living God's Future Now. And I understand the purpose of the church to live today, God's forever. And in a sense, you can say that God's future is the theology and living now is the ethics. So it's kind of a theological core with an ethical either side, living God's future now. And so, I'm in London. The most vocal and visible churches in London and now in the Church of England are evangelical churches, either charismatic or conservative. And they very, very much want people to come to church. The conservatives ones, I think, really do think they're taking people upstairs rather than downstairs. The charismatic ones don't talk about that, but they don't really talk about why they want people to come to church. They really, really want people to come to church. And they often say things like, well, there may not be a church if we don't evangelize and so on. But I haven't seen in their sort of public literature particularly articulate account of why that would really matter. Because from that kind of evangelical model, the church is really a means to an end. Now, obviously, you can go into parts of the Episcopal Church in the States where the church is an end in itself, but that doesn't make it a good thing, because it can be so thrilled with its own liturgy and history that it's a bonus if God gets a look in. Or, as I remember saying when I was at Duke Chapel, how fortunate of God to have such a wonderful building and congregation as this. So that's the church as an end in itself. But so what I've tried, and then of course on the more progressive side, you have the church as a means to an end, as an agent of the kingdom. So it's not to say the progressive side of the church doesn't have its own instrumentalization of the church. So what I've tried to articulate in the book, and particularly evaluate in the appendix, is what it might look like for the church to live God's future now, to live today the life of heaven as closely as we can. And then rather than saying that in simply a pious way, to actually say as articulately as we can what interactions, practices, devotions, habits, skills that it would entail. So yeah, the sort of bums on seats metrics, the quantitative, as you say, it doesn't rule those out, but that doesn't answer the question, why do you want people to go to church anyway? And the danger is you want people to go to church because you quite like church and you want there to be others there with you, so you don't have to pay for it all yourself, and want people to come after you so you don't feel that your efforts were wasted. But those aren't really good enough reasons. So obviously, like everybody on this call, I would love my church to be full every Sunday, 5 times a Sunday at every service. But that doesn't lead you to an evaluative tool. What this is an eschatological evaluative tool. It's saying if our job is to live God's future now, to anticipate today the way things will be with God forever. We need to put some language around that, and then we need to work out some questions and evaluative methods to assess that. And of course, in very crude terms, if the choices are, a community of holiness, a community of imagination, a community of faithfulness, that is living the kingdom of God, vis-a-vis a full to bursting church that is basically, prosperity gospel, instrumentalizing God in a project of one's own self-fulfillment, you'd probably prefer the first one. But we've kind of lost sight of that in our sort of panic about falling numbers. So that's a bit of the hinterland behind this appendix.
Can you speak about how you would actually go about evaluating, like in your parish or in a parish that is this kind of like does the leadership team or the church wardens or clergy team get together once a year before vestry or is this brought back, weekly or monthly before the group for anecdotal sort of conversation? How would you implement that, or how is it?
No, I think it almost inevitably has to be an external consultant. I mean, I'm not saying that person has to work for McKinsey, but I think you need to be able to say, our vestry, our PCC, as we call it, is embarking on a process, as we do every 5 years, of self-evaluation. And to enable us to do that, there's going to be this funny-looking person hanging around the back of church for a few months. And they may want a word with you, and they may be in touch with you by email. They may ask you some questions. What they're asking is not to be sort of critical or to be scrutinizing you personally. They're just developing data in order to enable them to see how we're doing as a church and where we could be better, and where what we're doing is going so well that it's something we might want to share with others. But I think it's setting somebody aside to do it. I think to do it yourselves, marking your own homework, I'm not sure that's such a good idea.
Okay, thank you. May I ask, I think this is related in some way, but may I ask your perspective on strategic planning? I've known some who think that's what you do as a smart person or smart community, and others who maybe would rather focus on other things. And I think
that is a very, very timely question, because tomorrow morning I've put 2 hours aside on my calendar, the day before I go away for a long weekend, at the end of a long week, to take our strategic plan to the next stage. And that's to say, I've spent 3 sessions with one fellow PCC member, 1 session with another PCC member additionally, and the other 2 had spent a couple of sessions with them independently of me. We spent a session together on Monday morning, and now I've got to do one of the things I least like doing, which is filling in one of those Google documents that the other people can see as you do it. I always make a complete pig's ear of those things. I never really believe that it's saved. Do you know what I mean? It's, I've got all of that. So that's what I'm going to be doing for a couple of. I'm going to have to get up early because I've got to get it done before lunchtime. And but what I thought I might share with you, though, is the bare outlines of that, because I think it might, the 8 sections that we're working with. The joy of speaking on Zoom, I can find somewhere on my laptop a draft of this, and my internet's not happy. Are you still getting me? Shout back at me.
There was about 3 seconds it went out, but it's good now.
Yeah, we lost your voice for a bit. But...
Sorry about that. Okay, let me find it. Here it is. And so what we've done is we've divided it into two sections of 4 elements each. And now I've just lost it again. Here it is. And the difference is, St. Martin's is a well-known church. It's had a mission well beyond its walls for 110 years. And I always say, us being a parish church is fundamental to our DNA, but also us being a church with a wider mission is fundamental to our DNA, and we never let go of either of those, and we never feel we have to prioritize one over the other. Those are all kind of foundational for us. So there's two sections. One's called A Calling To, and the second section is called A Particular Calling To. So the first section is what any church would do, and the second section is what we're being called to. So I'll just to go through them quickly. The first one is be with God in worship and discipleship. The second is be with one another in ministry and fellowship. The third is maintain and enhance a beautiful, accessible building. The third is become an exemplary the fourth is become an exemplary organization. And then on the particular calling, we have be with people on the edge, foster choral music and a wider artistic program, integrate social enterprise within our ministry and mission, and be an agent of renewal in church and society nationally and internationally. So hopefully that gives you a sort of an idea of how we're trying to balance our particular commitments with our more generic, whatever we expect. You'd expect every church to do the first four. And you'd expect every church to have something in the second group, though obviously that would be particular to your own context and history and calling. So we have a budget, the PCC alone, I mean, the whole site, all 300 staff, the homeless centres, the social enterprise has a budget of about 20 million pounds, that is. The PCC has a budget of about 2 million. So, we have to do some of this for budgetary, and obviously the really hard yards that you want your person with a finance background to do is to align what I've just read out to you with the budget. I am not doing that myself. I'm just saying. That is, that takes people good with spreadsheets and numbers and stuff. But in a sense, what I'm really trying to do is to get our PCC to think, theologically as well as strategically about what we're really trying to do. So, for example, if we face a choice between, shall we say, starting a new morning service or partnering with the diocese to take over a church that's struggling and trying to revitalize that church, do we do neither, one, the other, or both? How do we make a decision like that? Well, if we've got a strategic plan, we go back to the strategic plan and say, for the next 2 years, we said we were going to do this, this, and this, but not this, this, and this. So it's not on the strategic plan. We're not going to do it. We might do it in 2 years' time. If that church is still available. Do you see what I mean? So I think in terms of being transparent about decision making within a wider community and having a logic to what you're doing, other than what does everyone think, it's a grown-up way to communicate. And of course, because we're partnering with our company and with our fundraising organ, we need to be as clear as we can to communicate to them. And sometimes their lead times are bigger than ours. If the trust is trying to raise £500,000 for us because we've got a deficit, and they're thinking of doing a big fundraiser, they probably want 9 months' notice about doing that big fundraiser, and they need to know how much we're trying to raise from that big fundraiser. So it's no use us saying, oh, do you happen to have £500,000 you're not using? We have to have a plan that says our cash flow is going to be in difficulty come next July and August, and so we really need you to have a big gala in May. Do you see? So I mean, for those kinds of reasons, and also you can have a proper argument because every single person here has been on a church committee, which ended up. I remember the first church committee meeting I ever went to in 1987. The most of the discussion was about whether you preferred wafers or regular bread at communion. Now, I mean, that's a perfectly valid thing to talk about, but it wasn't really, as my evangelical friends put it, hitting this nation for Christ. So, there's obviously a happy medium between those two, but so rather than rolling your eyes and saying this is capitalism, come to the church and management speak and so on, management is faithful and respectful, selfless maximization of other people's time, efforts, talent, vocation for the good of the God's kingdom, or God's realm, as I usually call it these days. It can be done well or badly. Money can be spent well or badly. And a strategic plan is a way of getting 25 people to have a bit of input on how to do it well. And then to be able to look back at the end of the year and say, we committed ourselves to do this. It's no different to basically a family of grown-up children saying, we all now live in different parts of the country. If we don't, get together at Canadian Thanksgiving and New Year or Christmas and maybe Easter, we're never going to see each other. So can we put those dates in the diary now, please? It's just the same.
That's helpful. That's all really helpful. Thank you. How about we turn it over to we've had like a great multi-week study with lots of great discussion. And so how about we turn it to the wider
definitely.
group? If people would like to put their question or comment in the chat box, go ahead and do that. If you would like to audibly or verbally give your question, maybe raise your hand using the reaction tool at the bottom so I catch it, or physically if not. I know there was one question someone had flagged a week or two ago. You give a story about the stained glass windows that were broken at a church, and why should the neighborhood care or not? And so there was a question of how did things work out in the long run with those windows? How are they doing today?
Well, that's a happy story, and it's a nice, easy story. Do you see as I'm turning my computer around now, you can see those windows, because when I left St. Elizabeth's, they gave me Mary and Elizabeth. And then it just sort of made me cry. I mean, it was about 10 years later. I think I might have told this story in the book. There was one window left, and then they sent me Anne. There she is. And they didn't frame it in the right way, but it seemed a bit churlish to complain. So they're not quite matching, which is why I've arranged them as I have on the wall. I'm afraid I can't, without unplugging, get you any closer than that. But I keep them very close to me because they're very special to me. I mean, that church has been through several changes of leadership and church style, pretty much the full range, not extreme evangelical and not extreme Catholic, but it's been through pretty much the rest of the range in the 21 years since I left. But I think it's doing fine now. I mean, it was a toughest job I've ever done. For two reasons. One because it was a indifferent stroke hostile setting for ministry in terms of the wider community, and because it just wasn't a place of a lot of energy. I always said, working in the United States, North Carolina, and working in central London is easy because there's always energy. And energy is the one thing in ministry you can't manufacture. You can only harness. And there wasn't really much energy in Norfolk. So, but thanks for asking. Yeah.
Thank you, Bishop Patrick.
I was the one that asked the question, but I have other questions as well. I mean, I would think that in my 11 years of episcopacy, the churches that would voluntarily start to examine themselves, I could count in one hand, maybe plus a few fingers. And I think that in our diocese, one of the regular things that people do is when they have changed in incumbents, we write a parish profile. And I don't know whether Susan would agree with me. I think those documents and that process is usually about survival and marketing. And the whole culture of, not looking too closely at yourself, is church, but it starts with the clergy as well. I mean, the whole idea, I had a heck of a time pushing through any kind of annual meeting with the bishop to talk about ministry. It was just not done. So, I mean, in your experience, I mean, what's the state of the union in terms of England? And tell us some stories about those churches that actually start to see that as important.
Well, you've given me an idea. I've never done this, and it makes me think maybe it's something I would rather do in a congregation other than my own if I was a visiting preacher. But I don't know if any of you have ever preached a sermon about therapy. So I would suggest there's three ways of thinking about therapy or counselling, as you talk about it, if it's a less technical term, a less American term. One is, I'm not a basket case. Why are you suggesting I now need to go and see a shrink? That's sort of been displaced by a very assertive thing in what the American, I'm afraid I'm not as close to Canadian culture as I should be. In England, we call it EDI, and in America, it's called DEI. But, you've got your own version of it. We all know what we're talking about. We call it equality, diversity, and inclusion. I think equity is the word used in America. Anyway, what I'm saying is people use phrases like, have you done the work? And this word work becomes a different way of talking about therapy. I don't like that. I understand, I think, the point that it's making. Certainly, have you educated yourself in relation to something like Black Lives Matter and so on? I think I understand the force of what's being said there. I would rather think of it in a third way, which is to think of therapy as releasing the energy that is pent up by being used on things like bitterness, hurt, regret, resentment, guilt, and grief. And I think that covers most of it. So rather than have you done the work, how about, wouldn't you like to release the amount of energy that you're currently using up on those things? So you can see the sort of analogy I'm making, because in a sense, what this appendix is doing is a kind of therapy for a parish. And so on the one hand, it would be, there's nothing wrong with our parish. Why are you suggesting we need to do this stupid evaluation nonsense? That's the I'm not a basket case response. The second is, it can get very jargony, can be taken over by people who spend their whole life, embraced in a culture of evaluation and, particularly sort of consultant culture. I'm talking about in the corporate sense now. But I think I'd recommend a sort of a pragmatic. Wouldn't we like to use our energies better? I think of how much energy we constantly seem to be circling round over and over again. Every time the budget comes around, we seem to have an argument about X or Y. How can we break out of that cycle and become a more attractive community to join? Because you don't have to be inducted into how much we hated the last rector as a sort of passcode. So I don't have any. I mean, I recognize exactly what you're saying, Bishop Patrick, and I don't think it's 100% different here. I do think, though, to use the old joke about the light bulb really does what you need to have to change, want to change, and I think we are closer to that. And again, obviously, that kind of language is sometimes used in 12-step programs. We are closer to the point where our congregations know they have a problem. And when I say know they have a problem, and obviously I talk about this in the title of the book, they know that the solution to that problem is not simply to turn the clock back 40 or 50 years and be like we were in the 50s. I think that's becoming more universally, not universally, but more widespread as a default. But the patience to move beyond the language of problem and solution to character, story, and vocation, which I think are better words. That takes patience, and it gets past we want a nice young man with a young family so he can start the children's work, which, as far as I'm aware, is still the default place of most parish representatives when they, and the gendered part of it, I don't apologise for, because I think it's just a fact. That's, and I know that partly because my wife's a bishop and she went through these processes for 7 years in the diocese she served, and that's what she came back and said. Yet again, I'd make supper or something, and she'd come back from meeting the parish representative, and she'd say, "You'll never guess what. They want a nice young man with 2 young children to start the children's work." And I'd say, knock me down with a feather. I've never heard anything like it. So that's more of a story than an answer. But
thank you. And Paige, do you want to? I see Susan's put a comment in the chat. Do you want to share that? And if Susan, if you want to expand on it.
Yeah, Sharon has responded to Bishop Patrick, and she has written, "I generally agree with your assessment of parish profiles. However, at least 2, I'd be curious about who those are, Susan, have seen since the pandemic have begun to be more honest about the situation that they're facing and the desire for a new leadership to take a parish through a process of change." Do you want to speak more about that, Susan?
Thanks for editing me well, Paige. Yeah, I think one obvious situation is that that metric of bums in seats has changed since the pandemic, and that has finally shocked parishes into having to perhaps look a bit differently, and that even the leadership who are preparing the parish profile are beginning to recognize that. I don't know how widespread that is, but that's, I think that may be part of the reason that we're seeing something that is needed to be addressed and done, and a process like Sam Wells is proposing, and why there might have been resistance, and maybe this situation might change things.
Yeah, thank you, Susan and Paige both. Anything else from the wider group in terms of questions you've been holding on to for a few weeks?
I have one. I'd be curious to hear from you about what the surprises continue to be, as you move further away from the book, but into your lived experience of leadership. Is there a consistent challenge that shows itself that you didn't anticipate as you were writing, or is there a blind side to the work that we should all be attending to or paying attention to?
That's a very good question. I mean, I guess none of us saw COVID coming, and this was published 6 months before the COVID outbreak. I remember in Easter 2021 saying to one of my clergy colleagues, you know, it may turn out that COVID was good for us. And I felt I was saying something quite counterintuitive at the time, because it didn't feel like that at Easter 2021. I think it's easier to say that now. I guess in a different way, what I'm saying is something I do say in the book and in other books, but to respond to your question, something I think I've just been increasingly aware of it, which is the Old Testament was written in exile, when in the face of having lost land, king and temple, counterintuitively, the Jews saw the face of God more clearly than they'd ever done in the Promised Land. And the early disciples did almost exactly the same when they looked back on the catastrophe of the cross and realized paradoxically they'd seen the face of God like never before, but on the cross. I thought it was supposed to be triumph and marching bands. And I think, certainly from St. Martin's point of view, that's the COVID story. I was sharing with some new staff doing a staff induction yesterday morning, and one of them said, what's been your best moment in 12 years at St. Martin's? And I said, you know what, I don't usually talk about this because it's a bit somber, but if I were to leave St. Martin's tomorrow and people would say, what's been your signature achievement here? I would say the fact that we didn't close down in 2020. And that just doesn't sound very exciting. We did not close down. I just remember coming down to the dinner table with my family, with those days of many of you had the same, the kids come home and suddenly the house isn't as big as it used to be. In sort of April, May 2020, and just being in tears because the finances were terrible, and I just didn't see how we were going to get through this. And yet it became a time of great innovation. Our Nazareth companions were created. There's now 150 of those in addition to our Nazareth community. We created the Being With course, which is now really taking off in the Church of England and the Episcopal Church, and even in some parts of Toronto. And our music started to be used by literally millions of people. It's had 5 million downloads, I think, now around the Church of England. So many extraordinary creative things started to happen that started in the ghastliness of March, April 2020. Sermon workshop we still do that started in March 2020, online every Tuesday. So, if that isn't a lived experience example of the theological insight that I just shared at the beginning, I don't know what is. It was horrible. I'd never, ever want to go through that again, and I'm sure you'd all say the same thing. And yet, it wasn't happy, but it's become beautiful. So,
thank you.
I think that's my best answer.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. Anything from the Water Group, Mary Kate?
Well, if there's something from the group, mine was slightly, they could go first. maybe to put out on there, Sam, it's not an unrelated question to this, but I remember very vividly when you brought us together at the beginning when you introduced this, and one of the things you said was that you were always surprised about the spread of this book, or at the time you were surprised that it was a book written for a particular context, geographical and temporal. And I think you said the Netherlands were big on it. And I know that in the 6 sessions that we've been together over the summer, that there has been considerable discussion. It sparked discussion, good, it's some things it aligned with experiences individuals were having in their parishes, and sometimes there was a bit of contrast in what the experiences were, but it was always incredibly fruitful and inspirational. But so I wonder, are you not just on our experience, but are you still of that mind that this is your book for a context, or are you seeing this and do you know, is it what is that attributable, or do we know?
Okay, I think there's a few things going on there. I mean, the first thing is we're all different. Some of us say, look, don't patronize me. I can do the thinking for myself. But what I would fancy is I don't want to sit down and prepare what Americans would call a curriculum. I don't want to prepare, a series of 8 evenings or 8 Sunday lunchtimes or whatever for my congregation. And if I can just buy that off the shelf and use it, photocopy it, whatever, so that's one kind of person. Another kind of person would say, I can produce as many Bible studies as night follows day, but I just haven't got the headspace, and I need real pushing to think about things like, if we don't think people are going to hell, what on earth is the point of the church? I need some help to complete the sentence and think that through. And I would welcome somebody who, whose theological vision I share, I'm inspired by, encouraged by, would endorse, that kind of thing, to help me through that. So we're all different. And I think so that's the first thing to say. People approach it for different reasons, and I think the book is basically and then the other thing I want to say about it, in terms of preliminary answer, is that sense that the Church of England has big time at the moment, which is, I think, the first 2 sentences of the book. The church is getting smaller, the church is getting narrower. Is just, I've found that those 2 sentences have really resonated with a lot of people in the Church of England. They feel that the evangelicals are making all the noise, and they're presenting, a narrower gospel, which seems exclusive, is experienced as exclusive to significant constituencies in the church, and those who care about those constituencies, even if they're not from those places. And there is what you could call it, paralysis, despair, or complacency in more progressive circles, or absorption in more personal issues, gender and sexuality, and the sort of social vision, that kind of, and a nervousness around strategic plans, or around getting organized. So I think this book has been popular with people who say, I'm not a conservative. I am a faithful Christian. I really do believe it all, but I'm not like that. And actually, I've got great enthusiasm for ministry, and I do have people around me who want to go places together. It's not easy, and we don't have lots of money, but I share the mindset of where this, and I don't see a lot of other literature coming from that place. Most of the literature coming from that place is lament, criticizing conservatives, or writing commentaries on George Herbert's poems. In other words, retreat into a rarefied kind of idealized form of church. So this is can do. sleeves rolled up, but it's also theologically mature, shall we say. And so I think people can come at it from any of those sort of backgrounds. There's a bit of how-to, but it's not really a how-to book. There's quite a lot of theological infrastructure, particularly at the beginning, but it's not a systematic theology book. And it's full of real church life, institutional life examples that people can really relate to. And they think, yeah, we do actually have a really good space that could be a cafe. But should we be employing entirely disabled people, or ex-prisoners? Or how do you think about, or is it just another business? So it helps you think through those kind of things. So I think that's why people have related to it, because it energizes a part of the church that really wants energizing. I mean, it both needs energizing and it has an appetite for it, but it doesn't have a lot of literature that's theologically rich, that is actually has some theological sophistication addressing those things. I mean, I guess that's me, really, and that's how I've gained the reputation such as it is that I've had, because I guess I am a practitioner and a theologian at the same time, and a preacher, and so different people like different bits of those, and I guess the sweet spot is that quite a number of people seem to like the fact that they get the whole package, and I guess this book is the whole package.
Thank you. We might have time for a quick question before our conclusion. I know Jeffrey was going to talk about the Hard Edge Network and so forth. Does anyone have a question while we have the opportunity here? I do have one that I've been hanging on to. Is the group okay if there's no one else that has? Okay. So, and maybe this is kind of connecting with some of what you were saying, but Sam, when you talk in the book about living out the kingdom, or living the values of the kingdom, embodying what we feel called to be, I felt in some ways there was some similarities to a provocative book of recent years, the Benedict option, which kind of says, like, the church needs to do what it's not seeing out there in the world. I also sense that, and I'm not sure how close you've come to that book and what it's saying. I also sense that you're also coming from a very different place from that author, or have some different thoughts and theologies. So can you maybe briefly speak a bit on, are there some parallels and similarities, but also how is what you're saying different from what, is it Rod Dreher is saying?
Yeah, no, I haven't read the book. I assume that the title comes from the last paragraph of Alistair MacIntyre's After Virtue. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
that's
it
what
possibly
I think
a misunderstanding of MacIntyre, but we'll see what you say first.
Well, I mean, so what people often read MacIntyre to be saying is we need to become the Essenes. We all need to decamp to the Dead Sea, develop abstruse religious practices, and seal ourselves off from the world. I don't think that's what MacIntyre is actually saying. I think he's pointing to the beginning of what used to be called the Dark Ages. I don't know what they're called now, but where civilization was held together by the church, and the renewal of civilization came, just as Aristotle's works would have been lost had it not been for people in places like Damascus keeping them, who weren't Greek speakers but translating them into Arabic and everything. We wouldn't have Aristotle today, and it came back into the West in the 12th century. Likewise, we wouldn't have had most of the things like clocks that we have today if it hadn't been for the monks in the 500, 600, 700 AD period. So I would like to say that my way of reading that MacIntyre paragraph is, and he does talk about a new and very different St. Benedict, as I recall the actual phrase in the book. So, you can't be fundamentalist about it, if you like, because he doesn't let you. But to see that actually a truly flourishing church is a blessing to everything it touches. So, it can be an agent of renewal in society as well as to get the bums back on the pews, So that's how I would want to read a more humanist, in the positive sense, reading of MacIntyre, which I think he would endorse. So I don't think that actually is a very, it's words like catalyst. I think it's, I think that churches that do the kind of things I'm talking about in this book become sources of blessing. When I was at Duke Chapel and Duke University before I came to St. Martin's, my principle was there are 36,000 people in this community, in the university and the hospital. Every single one of them knows that Duke Chapel is here because it's the most prominent building on the campus, and when the basketball's on, they show a picture of the tower and that kind of thing. Everybody must know about Duke Chapel, and everybody must, on some level, experience it as a blessing. That is our sort of basic operational mission statement. And it came from an old Church of England vicar who said to me when I was first an incumbent, a rector, that's what I mean by incumbent, you don't have to know everybody, but everyone has to know you. It's the first principle of incarnational ministry of that kind in a parish of the Church of England kind. You can't be a blessing to them if they, have no idea that your church is there or whatever. They have to know, have some experience of your church, and that has to be a positive experience. And there's not much more to it than that. You're just constantly, it's all there in salt and light in Matthew 5, really.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very much for that and for all this engagement. And I'll turn things over to Jeffrey.
Just one more thing. Just one more sort of sentence on that is that there is a sort of Wendell Berryization of the church that you might recognize, where people, often inspired by climate emergency and a sort of soft distaste for capitalism, and a love of the outdoors and home-baked bread and a bunch of other stuff, somehow, despise is too strong a word, but somehow feel that conventional society is a bit beneath them and they really want to withdraw from it. That might not go as far as creating a sort of alternative economy in a kind of commune type sense. It might be just it might just refer to which literature that they read or which magazine they subscribe to or websites they go to. But I do think that's a sort of soft, wrong reading of the Benedict option. And what's wrong with it is it ends up with Feuerbach's criticism of the church in 1841, which is, we're just better than you lot. The world is lucky to have us. You are not worthy of us. That sense of cultural superiority that Christians have over others, it's almost like in believing in Wendell Berry rather than St. Augustine. I think Wendell Berry is great, and don't get me wrong, but I mean, in sort of idealizing that kind of, and there's plenty in American culture that you'd want to distance yourself from. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking to a bunch of Canadians, I'm sure. But it can be just a different way of saying we're better than you. And the whole Trump phenomenon, I think, has just enhanced that in the sort of Wendell Berry church, because there is quite a lot to deplore. But that sense that actually church is instrumentalized in a project of saying, we have a sort of superiority of you, it's pernicious. There's no humility in it. There's no grace in it at the end of the day. Do I need to leave you to it? I think.
Well, I think we'd like you to be there as we thank you in the first instance for the real gift of your time today and at the beginning of this, but the book itself. Although I want to thank everybody, because I think I've learned as much from the group and the really rich, robust conversation that's been engendered by us reading the book as much as I have from you, Sam, throughout this.
That can't be true, Jeffrey. I'm insulted and demeaned by that remark.
But we want to keep that going. I find it really interesting. We landed on Benedict there at the end. I completely share your assessment of Rod Dreher's take on Alistair McIntyre. I think he got him completely wrong. It's funny because in one of our group discussions during this book study, I mentioned Benedictine monasteries, in the early Middle Ages as almost perfect embodiments of the four C's, right? This is
Yeah, no, that's
congregation,
a great
compassion,
point. That's a great point.
culture, and commerce, because these were the places everybody came and they inspired industry. It was that outward focus. And I think what Rod Dreher gets completely wrong is a circle the wagons kind of thing and wait it out, and then one day we'll go back kind of thing. And he's completely wrong. We need to keep doing, as you said, even in times of pandemic, this is the time to be moving out and innovating and being flexible, creative, and living God's future now. I mean, that never stops being our job. So as a group, we want to carry this on and extend this. And so there's a few different ways we're going to do that. In the first instance, I want to mention that Andrea will be sending out an evaluation for this book club and make sure that if there's anything we can be doing to improve these things going forward. So do give us your feedback. The series that started back in May, the Church Beyond the Walls, and thinking about humbler church, bigger God, and the kinds of things that we can be doing with the likes of Heart Edge continues next Thursday, a week today, and about an hour later from now, we're going to have Alison Milbank taking us through the Once and Future Parish and some themes coming out of that. So look for the link for that in the next week, and do come along to that and share that with others. Heart Edge Canada will be a thing. I'm noticing that Heart Edge generally is being renewed at the moment. There are a couple of new people, Sean and Andrew Yates, sort of taking the helm of that. I'm excited to see there'll be a new website by the end of next week. And some of the things they're talking about for Heart Edge relate to some of the conversations we've had. In other words, the concern that maybe in some configurations or thinking about it, it's very urban, very resource intensive, and they're thinking about how can this extend out to rural communities. I know a lot of you have been involved in rural ministry, so I think we'll keep in touch with that, but also give a Canadian network space for us to discuss how it is that we can be, and this is this wonderful phrase we picked up from that last chapter last week, communities of hope renewed from the edge, meeting God in adversity, inspired by enterprise, discovering talents, humbled by repentance, and becoming a blessing. And we were talking last week about how that should really be the mission statement of all of our parishes. So look for all of that and more to come. Further events during that series will include next month in-person events with Jeremy Begbie doing some work at Trinity College. So stay in touch. And I'll be sending out some information for everyone to sign up to a Heart Edge Canada network in the near future, where we can really just share good practice and experience. And this question of measurement too came to mind today. And Sam, you said it's good if it's done externally. We can't all afford kind of high-powered consultants, but I wonder if something we could be doing through Heart Edge Canada is to offer external support and measurement to one another, to visit each other's parishes and at least in some modest way offer that accountability and support. But anyway, all that for the weeks and months to come. But thanks again, Sam, for inspiring us and supporting us and praying for us as we do you and your ministry. So
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.